Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to our Insider Insight Show. I'm honored to have back with me someone who I consider a dear friend and someone who, he and his family are patriots of the highest order. They have taken on the syndicate like, well, very few families have ever done in our country's history. The Trump family, I would put in that category, and the Flynn family. It's my honor to have back with me Joe Flynn. A little background on Joe. He's the spokesperson for the Mike Flynn Legal Defense Fund. MikeFlynnDefenseFund.org. MikeFlynnDefenseFund.org. Joe Flynn is an independent business executive and entrepreneur based on Florida's Gulf Coast. Just recently, he retired as president and CEO of Verico and Company Incorporated, a Southern California-based healthcare IT services company. It's my honor to welcome back Joe Flynn. Joe, welcome back to the Insider Insight Show and the Operation Freedom platform.
Dave, one thing to add to that, a California refugee in Florida.
There you are. There are more and more of those, that's for sure, right?
20 years in California, we threw in the towel.
There you are. So Joe, let's hit on something that the media, lamestream media, has avoided. And recently, I.G. Horowitz issued a report on the FBI. And just a brief summary: no confidence, problems found in dozens more FBI spy warrants. Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz notified FBI Director Christopher Wray on March 30th that, quote, he did not have confidence that the agency was providing appropriate supporting documentation to back up assertions after violations were found following a review of more than 24 FISA warrant applications, according to a publicly released memo. Quote, as a result of our audit work to date and as described below, we do not have confidence that the FBI has executed its Woods procedures, which is how they determine whether something is legitimate or not before they send it to the FISA process, in compliance with FBI policy. He wrote that in his management advisory memorandum addressed to Ray. Your take on that, Joe?
Well, clearly, there's been a history here of abuse of power by the FBI, and it hasn't been cleaned up. Clearly, with the IG report, which is actually astonishing, is that it hasn't been cleaned up under Christopher Wray either. We're talking about, Dave, you know this, we're talking about FISA. We're talking about the most intrusive government spying on anything, especially on U.S. citizens, okay? And we're looking at massive abuse here and massive incompetence on behalf of the FBI people and the Department of Justice people that have been involved with this over the last several years. And this isn't just the last under Trump administration. This has probably been going on for years and years. Okay, who knows how long this has been going on? What's shocking to me is that nobody's being indicted over this. I view this as criminally negligent behavior on behalf of law enforcement officials. Don't you think so? I mean,
I agree.
What's more intrusive than having your phones tapped and your computers tapped, and they're do this, have a slipshod process, people forging documents, people suppressing evidence, and this has been allowed to happen, and it's being allowed to happen under Christopher Wray, unfortunately, who's a member of the Trump administration appointed by President Trump himself. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than this.
It really doesn't, Joe. And unfortunately, much of this is continuing to get swept under the rug. And as it continues to get swept under the rug, innocent people, such as your brother, General Mike Flynn, get caught in the crossfire.
Well, they can certainly, I mean, listen, I'm sure it was even more egregious under the Obama administration because those DOJ officials, those FBI officials like McCabe and Comey and Strzok and the rest of that team, let's say that small team that's always talked about, they were politically motivated in there. It wasn't just incompetence. It was politically motivated to ensure that either Donald Trump wasn't going to get elected president, or once he was elected president, they were going to do everything they could to try to get him thrown out of office in one way or the other. And so that's one thing where it's politically motivated deception and corruption of the FISA process. It's another thing that it continues on and under the Trump administration by people appointed by Trump himself, which, by the way, includes Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein was appointed by Trump. Unfortunately, the Attorney General has come out on numerous occasions talking about how great he thinks the job that Christopher Wray is doing. And then this report comes out and basically slams Christopher Wray and his team for their lack of oversight on the FISA process. So and now it's swept under the rug. This information comes out during this COVID or Wuhan virus pandemic hysteria nonsense. And you know what? The press isn't even going to cover it. Barely. The only press covering this right now is patriotic press like yourself, maybe Gateway Pundit. I throw John Cardillo, certain people on Twitter who are very focused on this stuff. They're the ones throwing this out there. Everybody else, they're not going to even. This Wuhan nonsense gives them an opportunity to just sweep this right under the rug. If it was in a different era, if it was a Republican, if it was if it was in a different era, they'd be screaming bloody murder. Okay, and it's just, I don't know where it goes. I'm kind of, I wish I was not going to say this, but I sort of losing hope in the whole justice system based on the lack of action that's being taken with regards to this FISA abuse, which is, it's worse. Talk about Watergate or worse than Watergate. What do you think, Dave?
Joe, I'd like to argue with you, but I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. It's as though we're stuck on backward here, dealing with this issue. And your brother issued a declaration of on his own behalf, and it was issued on January 29th. And now we're several months after that, and his declaration laid it all out on the table. It laid the facts on the table. And very few individuals have picked up what he put on the table and said, look, this is a terrible abuse that's occurred here. And I want to hit on a couple points that he brought up, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
As you know, he had pleaded guilty under his former attorneys. His current attorneys, Sidney Powell and her team, are brilliant and outstanding and courageous freedom fighters. I can't say the same about his previous counsel. And you and I have addressed that before. But I want to take you to a part of General Flynn's declaration that is incredibly troubling. And here's what he says. Because many people say, well, why did he plead guilty? Why did his attorneys let him plead guilty? Because it appears from the evidence that's come forward now that the government has reluctantly brought forward that the two FBI agents who interviewed him, Strzok and Pienka, actually thought that he was legit telling the truth. And here's General Flynn's own words. Still struggling with the decision whether to plead guilty, I asked my former attorneys to make further inquiry with the special counsel's office, prosecutors, about whether the FBI agents believed that I had lied to them. In the preceding months leading up to this moment, I had read articles and heard rumors that the agents did not believe that I lied, something I also firmly believed. Mr. Keller and Mr. Anthony, General Flynn's attorneys at the time, from a firm called Covington, left the room to call the special counsel's office prosecutors. When they returned, they informed my wife and me that they had been told that the, quote, the agents stand by their statements, end quote. Because I was then unaware that the agents had made the statements described in this declaration, and because I was unaware of what had passed between my former lawyers and the special counsel's office outside the room, I then understood them to be telling me that the FBI agents believed that I had lied, when in fact, they had said he hadn't lied.
Or they didn't believe he had lied. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So then you try to, what was the intent of Kellner and Anthony? What was their intent in going back into the room with Mike and Lori and saying they stand by their statements? That's a very legal, that's a very lawyer way to answer. You know what I mean? They stand by their statements. Well, what statements? The statement that they didn't think they were lying, or the statements that they were making to the special counsel that that he wasn't being entirely truthful. It gets very confusing at the time. And remember, proffer sessions, and Mike is describing in that declaration his proffer session. This is high pressure stuff, right? This is not. This is like Russian roulette kind of pressure. Mm-hmm. When they're saying, "Okay, we're going to indict your son." Wait a minute, what are you going to? It's back and forth. All the threats that the government's making in the proffer sessions, and time is ticking, and his lawyers are saying, probably in their own heads, let's just take a deal and move on from this. They're not saying to themselves, what do we need to do to defend our client? Let's make a deal to make this go away. We'll make it go away. We'll get a slap on the wrist. Trust us. Don't take this any further. Right. They're going to indict your son. They're going to bankrupt you. Yet the evidence clearly is now showing that the evidence was essentially suppressed. There was an enormous amount of exculpatory evidence that Sidney has dug up or demanded and still hasn't been given. Mm-hmm. That wasn't given during those proffer sessions to General Flynn when the gun was to his head. And this is where we're at right now. I'm careful not to make any comments about the effect, the Covington Burlington legal team, whatever. They had their reasons, but clearly they weren't gonna go to the extra mile, to the ends of the earth to defend their client. They wanted to get a deal and move on. That's what they wanted. Sidney's not doing that. Sidney's not going to sleep until he's exonerated from these charges, unless the president pardons him along the way, which could happen. Who knows? So,
and that pressure, he addressed it also in his declaration. I agreed to plead guilty the next day, December 1st, 2017, because of the intense pressure from the special counsel's office, which included a threat to indict my son Michael and the lack of crucial information from my counsel.
There you go.
I mean, Joe, tell me if I'm wrong, but this sounds like something out of a third world country.
It is a third world. It is Banana Republic stuff. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, whatever the heck his name is, special counsel, was third world Banana Republic nonsense. It was a witch hunt. The president says it absolutely right. Mike Flynn's declaration there is a real-time description of the witch hunt. Okay? It's a real-time description of the witch hunt. They put him. What did they do back in the 1600s? They put you in one of those things where they put your head and they put your head on the gallows. They put the noose around your neck and threaten to kick the stool out from under you. That's what happened.
It is what happened
in a figurative and somewhat literal sense. And the document you're referring to there should have been splashed all over the front pages of every newspaper in America. But that also has been suppressed and underreported by the press.
And then he went in front of Judge Sullivan again in January 2018 in a sentencing hearing, which there are things that transpired at that hearing.
I was there.
That were off the charts, weren't they, Joe?
It was the most surreal experience that I'd ever had. In fact, I invited Sidney to that hearing. Mike had, at the time still had Kellner as his counsel, Covington Burlington as his counsel, and I said, Sidney, you got to come and sit with us, because Sidney was a big fan of Judge Sullivan. He's kind of a hero in her first book. There.
Yeah, License to Lie, great book.
And he did well by Ted Stevens, and that's great. Thank God, But in that courtroom, either that judge didn't read all the information that was given to him prior to that hearing, or I don't know what. But his reaction when he started asking about treason and things like that, in any of the charges against General Flynn that he pled to or anything like that, there was nothing even remotely close to treason. Okay? For him to even bring that word up was so shocking and so disturbing that I honestly felt literally like there was 5 members of my family in Sydney sitting there. We all felt like we were going to get violently ill from that statement. I mean, the gasps coming out of everyone's mouths were unbelievable. And no, what transpired in that courtroom, and then he has the gall to come out after recess and say, "I apologize. I didn't realize." One of his clerks must have said, "Judge, you just accused a 3-star general of treason publicly in front of the press," and then he had to come out and apologize. Well, the press didn't even ever report, not in one report, does the press say, and then the judge came out later and apologized.
Right, and said he was off limits.
Said he was, off the rails, misinformed or off, and so anyway, so it was shocking. I got to be careful. I'm not judging Judge Sullivan, but that incident was really shocking.
Well, and then many people say, well, why at the time? Because Judge Sullivan had said to General Flynn, do you still want to plead guilty? And General Flynn addresses this in his declaration. Prior to the sentencing hearing, they counseled me, his attorneys, former attorneys, that if the court were to ask me if I wanted to withdraw my plea, that I should say no, because the court would be giving you, quote, the court would be giving you the rope to hang yourself, end quote, his former attorney said. Regretfully, I followed my lawyer's strong advice to confirm my plea, even though it was all I could do to not cry out no when the court asked me if I was guilty.
That was a sad moment for Mike Flynn. I could tell when, we all cringed, and I could tell it was like a lamb to the slaughter. And I could just tell in his voice. We were behind him. We couldn't see his face, but it was a sad day. It was a sad day for America, quite honestly, but definitely a sad day for him personally, for Michael Thomas Flynn personally. We were. It was heartbreaking. Honestly, I don't know other way to describe it. You did not have a team of lawyers at that time that were defense attorneys. They were deal attorneys. Let's make a deal attorneys. They weren't Sidney Powell on TV every night banging the drum about the innocence of their client. And throughout the process in working with them, when we set up they did some good things. We set up the legal defense fund through them. They advised that, and actually they advised me and Barbara on that, because Mike at the time was like, I don't want to go begging for money. I'm he's a proud guy and all this. And we said, Mike, what are you talking about? You're going to be, by the time this is over, you and Lori are going to have the shirts on your back, maybe. You know what I mean? We got to get some help here. Otherwise, we're in deep trouble, Michael. And he agreed to that. So they helped us with that. But throughout the process, Barbara and I were very frustrated because we didn't have anybody on behalf of his legal team that was publicly defending him in the press. Mm-hmm. And the press was hammering him. In 2017 and 2018, excuse me, the press hammered Mike Flynn daily. You remember this?
Oh, absolutely. It was brutal.
And what? They'd go back to the lawyers for comment? No comment. Go back to and then they'd go back to us, me and Barbara, for comment. We couldn't give a comment because we gave a comment, and sometimes we did comment. Then I'd get a phone call from one of the attorneys on his team. This is not going to be helpful. This is inappropriate. You're going to get him into trouble. Blah 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 blah, so on and so forth. Barbara and I would call each other, screaming at each other. Not yet mad at each other, but screaming about this. And we had a sense that something wasn't right. And here Sidney takes the absolute opposite tactic, mm-hmm. which is be in the press every night about this because it's a travesty of justice.
It is.
And defend this man and defend this patriot. And thank God for Sidney. She's absolutely the right person at the right time. And we're very blessed to have her.
Well, and our country's blessed to have her, Joe, because, as she says, this is about General Flynn's freedom, but it's also about every American's freedom. Absolutely. Because if they're going to do this to General Flynn, they can do this to anybody and everybody.
Well, and here we are in April of 2020, and they still haven't dropped the charges. Okay, right. They dropped the charges on Andy McCabe. No indictments to John Brennan, James Clapper, Jim Comey for lying to Congress. Everybody knows they lied. This small little thing, lying to Congress during the congressional inquiry on live television. No indictment. Mike Flynn, we kind of think he lied, but we don't really know. And we're sitting here and the charges haven't been dropped. In Bill Barr's AG,